Marcus had built his fortune the hard way. At 42, he was a man who had clawed his way up from a childhood of scarcity to a life most people only saw in glossy magazines. His empire wasn't inherited, it was crafted, brick by brick, business deal by business deal. The downtown skyline bore his mark, hotels, restaurants, and luxury condos that carried his name like a quiet signature. Yet, despite the wealth and the recognition, there was a part of his life that remained stubbornly incomplete. He was wealthy, yes, but lonely. His closest friends were college buddies who still teased him about being the perpetual bachelor, never quite settling down. They called him picky, but Marcus knew better. He had no interest in being someone's trophy or wallet. That was why, when Sabrina walked into his life, he convinced himself she was different. They met at a charity gala. Sabrina was striking, elegant, poised, the kind of beauty that turned heads without her trying. Marcus noticed her almost instantly, but what drew him in wasn't just her looks. It was the way she laughed at his joke, the way she touched his arm lightly when she spoke. She made him feel seen in a room full of people who only cared about his last investment. "You're Marcus Hale, right?" she asked, pretending as though she'd only vaguely recognized him. He nodded, used to the way people whispered his name like a brand. But Sabrina treated him as if he were a man, not a bank account. At least, that was how it felt. Their connection was swift. Dinners turned into late-night conversations, conversations turned into vacations. Marcus found himself enjoying the rhythm of being with her. She was attentive, affectionate, and eager to step into his world. His friends, however, weren't convinced. "You ever notice how she only asks about the things you own, not the things you do?" his best friend Derek said one evening over whiskey. "She knows the model of your car but doesn't know the name of your mother." Marcus brushed it off. People always questioned motives when it came to women and wealth. He told himself Derek was being cynical, maybe even jealous. Sabrina wasn't like that, he insisted. She was kind, thoughtful. When she smiled at him, it felt real. But even Marcus couldn't ignore the hints Sabrina dropped, subtle at first, then bolder. She admired the way his penthouse overlooked the city lights, asked how many more properties he owned, wondered aloud about the cost of his tailored suits. "I just want to feel secure, Marcus," she confessed one night, her voice soft as she leaned against him. "I've never had stability. With you, I finally do." It was enough to push him closer to proposing. He imagined a future with her, not just as the woman on his arm at business events but as his partner. Yet his instincts, sharpened from years of ruthless business deals, whispered caution. He'd seen empires crumble because men let their guard down at the wrong moment. So, when the idea of marriage came up, Marcus agreed, but on his terms. The prenup would be thorough, more thorough than most. Sabrina hesitated when the papers were placed in front of her. The stack was thicker than she expected, the legal jargon dense and intimidating. Marcus reassured her with a smile. "It's just formality, trust me. Everything you need is in there." She skimmed through, flipping pages without truly reading, eager to get to the part where she signed her name. After all, she believed this was her golden ticket, marriage to a man with more wealth than she could ever spend. The sooner she secured that, the sooner she could settle into her role as the adored, untouchable wife of Marcus Hale. What she didn't realize was that Marcus had designed the documents with the same precision he brought to his business deals. Every line, every clause, was crafted to look harmless while protecting his empire. Sabrina, blinded by the glitter of what she thought she'd secured, signed without a second thought. And just like that, the stage was set, a marriage born not of love, but of expectations. The wedding was everything Sabrina dreamed of, and everything Marcus allowed her to believe she had orchestrated. A cathedral decorated with imported white roses, a guest list stacked with influential names, and a reception that shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Sabrina basked in the spotlight, her diamond ring catching the camera flashes like a beacon of victory. Marcus, ever the composed groom, raised his champagne glass, watching her play her role to perfection. Married life, at first glance, suited Sabrina. She moved into Marcus's penthouse, a sleek glass and steel fortress towering above the city. The walls were lined with abstract art she couldn't pronounce, the closets filled with couture pieces she had only ever admired on runways. She wasted no time in making the space her stage. Within weeks, her social media transformed into a curated gallery of luxury, a photo by the infinity pool one day, a video of champagne brunches the next, captions dripping with hashtags about blessings and love. But behind the glossy posts, Sabrina's true character emerged. She didn't ask about Marcus's day at the office or his meetings with investors. Instead, she fixated on the next acquisition she could showcase. "I saw this necklace in Milan," she'd say casually. "Every woman at the gala will have one, I can't be the only one without it." When Marcus reminded her that extravagance wasn't sustainable without restraint, she laughed it off. Darling, what's the point of being rich if you don't live like it? Marcus studied her with quiet patience. In business, he'd learned that people revealed their intentions over time. Sabrina was no different. While she flaunted his wealth, he took note of every careless remark, every shallow gesture. She never once asked about his struggles building his empire, or the nights he slept in his office when he was just starting out. To Sabrina, the fortune was a finished product, a ready-made kingdom she believed she now co-owned. Still, Marcus played his part. He flew her to Paris for Fashion Week, took her to private islands, and indulged her whims, but always with careful observation. He noticed how she bragged to her old friends, not about Marcus himself, but about the cars, the yacht, the penthouse. She strutted like she had conquered wealth itself, never realizing Marcus was quietly tightening the boundaries around her world. The more Sabrina spent, the more reckless she became. She treated credit cards like monopoly money, furnishing her Instagram lifestyle with designer handbags, exclusive spa treatments, and limited edition couture. Marcus, meticulous as ever, had every purchase tracked. He saw the bills climbing and the debts stacking in her name. She believed she was bleeding his fortune. In reality, Marcus had made sure every indulgence legally tied back to her signature. The tension surfaced during a dinner party. Sabrina, dressed in glittering gold, raised a glass and joked about Marcus's bottomless pockets. The guests laughed, but Marcus caught the gleam in her eye. It wasn't admiration, it was entitlement. She saw herself not as his partner but as the rightful heir to everything he owned. Later that night, he confronted her gently. "Do you ever think about the future, Sabrina? About responsibility?" She rolled her eyes. "My future is secure, Marcus. I married you. What else is there to worry about?" It was the confirmation he needed. She wasn't interested in partnership or legacy. She was interested in ownership, his ownership. The irony was, while Sabrina reveled in her illusion of control, Marcus was already planning his move. He treated her spending sprees and arrogance like entries in a ledger, quietly stacking evidence for the day she would try to cash out. Because Marcus knew Sabrina wasn't in it for the long haul. He'd seen her type before, dazzled by the shine of wealth, blind to the strings attached. And in his world, no one took without consequence. It happened quietly at first, like hairline cracks in glass. Sabrina began making late-night calls Marcus never overheard. She became secretive with her phone, silencing notifications when he entered the room. When questioned, she brushed it off as catching up with old friends. But Marcus had lived his entire life reading people, in negotiations, in boardrooms, in cutthroat markets. He knew when someone was hedging their bets. The truth revealed itself one afternoon when Marcus returned home earlier than expected. He found Sabrina sprawled on the balcony, whispering into her phone. Her tone was softer than he had ever heard it, intimate, indulgent. She laughed at something said on the other end and murmured, "Soon, baby. Once it's official, half of everything is mine." Marcus didn't announce his presence. He simply stepped back into the hallway, his expression unreadable, and allowed her to keep digging the hole. That night at dinner, Sabrina leaned over the table, feigning sweetness as she complimented his choice of wine. He smiled politely, knowing she had already declared her intentions to someone else. Within weeks, Sabrina grew bolder. She met a younger man, a social climbing opportunist she paraded discreetly in Marcus's absence. The affair was sloppy, almost childish, but it wasn't lust that drove her. It was a strategy. Marcus overheard fragments of conversations where she and her lover plotted her future. She would file for divorce, claim half of Marcus's empire, and start fresh with a new partner while flaunting her newfound independence. Marcus, however, was 3 moves ahead. Long before the wedding, his lawyers had structured his finances into trusts, shell corporations, and accounts legally insulated from spousal claims. Every asset that Sabrina believed was community property was, in reality, untouchable. The penthouse? Leased under a holding company. The cars? Registered to the business fleet. The art she bragged about on Instagram? Loaned pieces from Marcus's private foundation. What Sabrina truly owned were the bills, every designer purchase, every trip charged under her name, every indulgence she signed for without reading the fine print. The mountain of debt she thought belonged to Marcus was a monument to her own vanity. When Sabrina finally filed for divorce, she entered the courtroom like a woman stepping into victory. Her makeup was flawless, her outfit calculated to project both wealth and innocence. She sat confidently beside her lawyer, convinced the law was on her side. Marcus, however, arrived without theatrics. He wore a tailored but modest suit, his demeanor calm, almost detached. His legal team moved with precision, quietly submitting documents, contracts, and records. When Sabrina's lawyer argued she was entitled to half of Marcus's fortune, Marcus's counsel smiled and opened the binder. The evidence unfolded like a trapdoor beneath her feet. Page after page detailed Sabrina's purchases tied to her personal credit. Records showed her signing agreements that made her solely responsible. Receipts bore her signature, binding her legally. The courtroom shifted as murmurs spread. The judge's eyes narrowed, reading through the pile of debt Sabrina had accumulated. Then came the revelation that shocked even Sabrina. Marcus's assets were not marital property at all. They were secured in trusts established years before he even met her, carefully protected from claims. The empire she believed she was entitled to split had never legally belonged to her. Sabrina's confidence crumbled in real time. She stammered, accusing Marcus of manipulation, but her protests only painted her as reckless and entitled. The judge, unsympathetic to her theatrics, ruled firmly, Sabrina would leave the marriage with none of Marcus's wealth and all of her own debt. The verdict was devastating. Everything she flaunted on social media, every piece of her curated lifestyle, was revealed to be nothing more than borrowed time, a performance bankrolled by her own ignorance. Marcus, expressionless, gathered his papers and stood. For him, this wasn't just a divorce. It was the closing of a deal, one where he had invested patience and precision, and reaped the satisfaction of a clean exit. For Sabrina, it was the beginning of a downfall she had never anticipated. The verdict wasn't the end for Sabrina. It was only the beginning of her unraveling. When the judgment became public record, whispers spread quickly through the city's elite circles. Once admired for her beauty and sophistication, Sabrina was suddenly the subject of ridicule. Socialites who had once clung to her side now kept their distance. Her invitations to galas, dinners, and charity events dried up one by one. Overnight, she went from admired wife of a wealthy magnate to a cautionary tale of ambition gone wrong. The bills began to pile up almost immediately. Creditors who had long allowed leniency under Marcus's name now demanded payment in full. The luxury handbags, the designer gowns, the sleek car she loved to pose with, all repossessed or sold off to cover her staggering debt. Sabrina moved out of the penthouse she once paraded online, relocating to a cramped apartment in a less prestigious part of the city. Her new lover, the younger man she had bet her future on, quickly abandoned her. Without Marcus's wealth to sustain the illusion, Sabrina was no longer a prize but a liability. He stopped answering her calls, leaving her with nothing but screenshots of texts that now read like mockery. Marcus, meanwhile, carried on without a ripple. His business empire continued to thrive, his reputation untouched. If anything, the story of his divorce only cemented his image as a man too sharp to be deceived. Investors admired his foresight, colleagues admired his discipline. He did not gloat publicly, nor did he speak of Sabrina's betrayal. To him, silence was the sharpest blade. Yet revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the absence of rescue, the deliberate refusal to extend a hand when the other person drowns in consequences of their own making. Marcus knew this well. He never needed to humiliate her directly, the world would do it for him. Months passed, and Sabrina's fall became undeniable. She tried to cling to relevance, pitching herself as an influencer of resilience and reinvention. But the internet was merciless. Every post she made was flooded with comments reminding her of the court case, of the wealth she squandered, of the man she tried to outweep but failed. Her followers dwindled, her brand partnerships evaporated. One evening, she spotted Marcus at a high-profile charity gala she could no longer afford to attend. From across the street, she watched him step out of a sleek car, flanked by associates and dignitaries. He looked untouchable, calm, confident, commanding respect without effort. Sabrina's reflection in a nearby window startled her, she barely recognized herself. Her once polished image had dulled. Her designer dress was second-hand, her jewelry fake. The life she had fought so ruthlessly to seize now felt like a cruel parody. In that moment, she realized the depth of her mistake. She hadn't just lost Marcus's wealth, she had lost her position, her reputation, her identity. Betrayal had seemed like the quickest route to freedom, but instead it had shackled her to a future defined by regret. Marcus never looked her way that night. He didn't need to. For him, revenge wasn't about watching her suffer, it was about knowing she had orchestrated her own downfall. The final act was not rage, but indifference. She had become irrelevant in his world, a ghost of her former self. Sabrina returned home to her empty apartment, the silence pressing down on her. Once she had lived in marble and glass, surrounded by applause. Now she sat alone, replaying decisions that had led her here. The irony cut deepest, she had married Marcus for a future she never truly secured, only to end up with nothing. Marcus, meanwhile, poured himself a glass of wine in the penthouse that still overlooked the city. He didn't celebrate, didn't boast, didn't smile at her downfall. For him, justice was quiet. He had outplayed her not with rage but with patience, foresight, and precision. In the end, Sabrina had thought herself the predator, but she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game Marcus had mastered long before she entered his life. Thanks for watching our story from the Untold Fiction. Like and subscribe for more intriguing and interesting stories like this one.